God, what happened to the Corollas? I guess we're doing Skylines now. 1992 Nissan Skyline GTR in 732 Black Pearl. I don't see these in black very often. New customer just purchased this car, initially came here for a post-purchase inspection. The customer is actually moving out of country pretty soon, unexpectedly. If he wants to take this car with him, he's kind of in a pinch to get this running, ready, and reliable, which is where we come in. So again, initially a post-purchase inspection. So for us, that includes a multi-point visual inspection, a compression leak down test, so that's wet and dry compression as well as the leak down, and then also a road test. You never know what weird gremlins are gonna come up on a road test, even though the car looks nice, so equally as important. So long story short, the engine's in good shape, engine's healthy, which is great news, but service has been severely neglected on this car. So the customer authorized us to basically take care of all the service items, again, getting this to be running and reliable the best we can before he's gotta leave. Before we pull this timing belt off, just wanted to show you guys the condition. So interestingly enough, you can see the original marks are here from a brand new timing belt. Somewhere on this belt, you can see like the Nissan script. Tension is not terrible. I've had some that have lost a severe amount of tension before, and I can wiggle the belt, you know, downright up and down like that. Hopefully you guys can see a severe amount of these little age cracks in this belt. Definitely a dangerous belt to continue to run. The most concerning of all is that we are actually off by one tooth on the intake cam. So based on the belt being tight, I don't think it jumped a tooth, although, you know, things happen. That either means someone installed the belt wrong or did it on purpose to try to get more power or something. But very concerning how long this engine ran being one tooth off on the intake cam. Definitely you can get some parallax error with lining up the two timing marks, but the other way to check is that there should be, from this timing mark, 38 teeth up to the next timing mark, and sure enough we have 39 teeth going this way, which definitely means the intake cam is one tooth off. Scary stuff. With the belt over the cam, you can get a better look at those micro cracks there. So again, a few interesting things about this car of the period modifications. You notice we actually have 4 blow-off valves on this vehicle. The owner and I got the car off the trailer. He was talking about what his expectations were, telling me a little bit about the car. And at one point he was like, yeah, and I don't know about this 4 blow-off valve nonsense. I was like, what do you mean 4 blow-off valves? And I saw it and I was like, oh, interesting. These HKS blow-off valves, there's actually a fancy T that tees, I believe, all 4 blow-off valves together. You can see this elbow is a fancy cast piece made for an R32 GTR. So I've never ever seen this before. I imagine this is like a rare piece. I did a few good road tests on this car. I don't even remember what the blow-off valves sound like. It's not like they make any fancy noise. But, you know, with 4 blow-off valves, you almost want them to sound like La Cucaracha when you let off the gas or something, right? We got 4 of these things. Although the car may seem a little bit rough to you guys, in my personal opinion, it's not so bad. One thing I told the owner that we are very fortunate for, or I should say he's very fortunate, is that it's relatively unmodified. All the stock stuff is pretty much here. And I say this because usually the worst case cars that I have to bring back that I get in the shop are, you can tell it's been modified and too many hands have been in it and a bunch of stuff's missing. That's absolutely the worst possible scenario. And I'll tell you a story about another Skyline I've done which pretty much well describes this car. The engine had an intermittent misfire. When I opened the passenger side compartment, computer was not bolted in, so it just fell out onto the floor. I looked at the computer and it also said Nissan remanufactured, and I was like, what is this nonsense? So why don't we go over a few things we found and what we're gonna do, what we're gonna replace. Really common older Nissans, these plastic fans don't hold up. If your Nissan's like more than 20-year-old, I recommend you just replace your plastic fan. Severe cracks on this thing. You can even see this. So basically what happens, you know, one day, not even under hard acceleration, just one day the plastic fan's gonna decide to let go. And all these are like knife blades, destroying your hood, destroying your radiator. So long overdue for this guy to get replaced. Similarly, your fan clutch, this guy's also probably from 1992. We are going to replace both of these guys. You guys can't hear it, but while I'm turning this thing, although there's like resistance, so like the viscous coupling is still working, this bearing feels rough as hell. It feels like there's a bunch of rocks in here. So both these guys getting replaced. I'll show you what we're replacing them with. Cool, check it out. Got Japanese writing, so OEM fan clutch from Nissan, and also the super secret. You can see the blade design difference in these two guys. So the secret upgrade, late R33 or R34 cooling fan. This is the secret if you have any RB powered Skyline. Well, that's kind of dumb because what Skyline doesn't come with an RB? No, that makes sense, yeah. So thank you to my good friend Colin Seaburn, who runs a shop out of Sonoma Raceway, for this super secret. One of the reasons I do the multi-point before I do the road test is because in my experience, this is really common. I have a lot of customers with multiple cars. Sometimes they have like 5 cars, 10 cars in their fleet, which means it's tough for them to know when is the last time which car got serviced. What I'm getting at is it's not uncommon for me to get a customer car here that is very low on oil or very low on coolant. That's why I do the multi-point first, because I'm going to make sure all the fluids are good. There's no serious safety concerns for me or the engine before I road test the car. So did it with this one as well. Engine oil, very discolored. You could dang near smell the fuel in the oil. Severely discolored, very dark. Must have been thin because it was fuel diluted. But again, neglected service, right? Oh yeah, and just pro tip, if you're gonna store the car, change the oil before you store the car, because actually there's acids in the oil that from the regular combustion process that'll eat away at internal engine components while the car is being stored. So pro tip, change your oil and filter before you store the car. Intake filter is actually pretty cool. Let's take a look. EMS, I believe, is a well-known like Skyline tuner or Skyline parts manufacturer. So these intake elbows are pretty cool. Although I believe the brackets are missing for these guys. These guys aren't supposed to dance around like that. I think I've done some other aftermarket intake kits on GTRs before, and there's usually a provision for the brackets to hold the intakes still, because again, these guys aren't supposed to dance around like that. Aftermarket air intakes, obviously cone filters, the clamps are missing. That's fine, that's like the least of our concerns at this point. The hood spoiler, really common with this vintage of Skyline, the hood spoiler, and then on some Skylines, the actual rear blade on the rear wing is adjustable. You take the end caps off, and then you can adjust the angle of the rear blade. Similar problem happens if you take a look. I know it might be tough to see, but there's captured studs for the hood spoiler. If you look, I know it's tough to tell, but the whole stud is spinning. Again, really common on this vintage of Skylines where there's supposed to be a captured stud. Usually the fastener and the stud get seized together, and then instead of them, you know, unscrewing from each other, it'll break the plastic or break the fiberglass off of, you know, either the rear wing blade, the front hood spoiler, anything like that. Super inconvenient. We're not going to deal with that. We have bigger mechanical things to deal with. Again, multi-point before we road test, right? I noticed the coolant was low in the radiator. We had to add half a gallon of coolant for the coolant level to appear in the radiator. We're gonna get ahead of ourselves, but another reason to add coolant to the radiator is as part of the leak down test. And again, getting ahead of ourselves, if I leak down the engine and it's bubbling out through the radiator, that's guaranteed my head gasket's bad. But I would have never known if there's no water in the radiator or coolant in the radiator to let me know. The owner towed the car here. When he was unloading the car off the trailer, I said like, hey, roll down the windows, because both the windows were rolled up. And I didn't know if he didn't hear me or what happened at the time, right? So he took the car off, and then later on he told me, oh yeah, once in a while all the interior electronics don't work. And I was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense why you didn't roll down the windows when you were unloading the car off the trailer. So sure enough, the car could start and drive. I don't think the battery was charging, and doing a little bit of research, I found this guy right here that clips in to the B plus terminal. This is a fusible link, so if there's a big short inside the cabin, this wire should slow burn and break off to prevent it harming the rest of the electrical system. This thing had a piece of sheathing When I tried to pull these apart by hand gently, these wouldn't pull apart. So I was like, huh, what's going on here? This thing's not burnt up. And then, just from experience, I know like, well, sometimes if there's like 1 or 2 strands of wires, they can still sometimes conduct, right? And like things can still work. Again, experience thing. I just used my fingers and I went across the sheathing, and sure enough, there was a skinny spot in it, and I forgot exactly what happened, but like I pinched hard enough or whatever, and sure enough, this thing like fell apart in the middle, and I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. So temporary repair just so I could road test this guy. I put a crimp in there and plug this guy back in. And long story short, yeah, this is the fusible link for all the interior electronics. You can see right here, that brown spot, how like soft that thing is. I imagine from taking the battery on and off, so how many times these wires get brittle. Yeah, you got to remember this thing's from 1992 also. So okay, so brand new fusible link from Nissan. Again, one reason I love Skylines is because Nissan parts bins these cars, which it means that a lot of these parts come off of other cars. I found the part number. I was able to get that fusible link at our local Nissan dealer, which means some other USDM Nissan takes the same fusible link. Hooray, Nissan. You guys can't see it because the coil pack cover's on. Again, deferred maintenance, unskilled hands, whoever was the original owners, plural. A bunch of the hardware was missing for the igniter and then the coil pack cover. This still has the original coil pack and harness in it. The problem with running this beauty cover is that it literally becomes an oven inside. So I forget what the process is called, but like convection, so like hot air is circulating around in that thing, as well as the heat from the engine. It literally bakes the coil pack harness brittle. That's exactly what happened in there. It's not terrible. I've done some JZ stuff where like it crumbles apart in your hands when you disconnect the coil packs. In the future, what I'd recommend is the PRP R35 coil pack conversion. Again, whoever worked on this before, all the spark plugs were loose in this car. When I pulled them all out to do the compression leak down, I noticed all of them were fouled. Again, there's like foreshadowing, right? My engine oil smells like fuel. My spark plugs are all fouled. We're piecing together the puzzle, and we're also foreshadowing. So of course, we put new spark plugs from NGK in it. Accessory belts. This is the idler for the AC pulley. Preemptively, we're gonna replace this guy. As I turn it, I can feel it Captain Crunchy inside this bearing. I've seen these fail before. They'll start making a small squeak, and then the bearing will literally disintegrate or explode. So preemptively, we're just gonna replace this guy. All the belts had cracking in them. I don't know if these were ever replaced since this car has been in the US, because these are all pit work. You can see every single belt pretty much looks like that. We were able to source some accessory belts stateside of the same size. Nothing special about those belts, aren't like Skyline only. So my favorite part, compression and leak down test. So again, long story short, this engine ended up being healthy. I was happy to deliver that news to the owner, because I've had to give the bad news to a few GTR owners at one point or another. Never happy to do that. I remember one time it was going to be Thanksgiving weekend. I decided after Thanksgiving weekend to make that phone call for obvious reasons. Alright, so compression leak down test. You need to do all 3 tests together to get a comprehensive picture. Just doing a dry compression test means nothing for me. You can throw those results in the garbage. And so here's why. Dry compression test, so just putting the tester in there, cranking the engine over, and getting a number. That'll give you a rough painting, rough outline of what the engine condition is. Usually you do a wet compression test, so squirting, one or two squirts of oil into one cylinder and putting in your compression tester. Usually you do a wet compression test to narrow down where the problem is coming from if you have a cylinder with low compression. So the oil that you squirted in would take up some of the space in the cylinder walls, the piston ring, and if our numbers went up, then you'd have a problem with the bottom end, like worn piston rings, piston, worn walls. If you had a low cylinder, you squirted some oil, did your compression test again, did your wet compression test, and the numbers stayed the same pretty much. Like 5 to 10 psi difference would still tell me, oh, the problem's actually not in the bottom end. The problem our compression loss is probably somewhere else. This is where the leak down test comes in. Leak down is going to be the most accurate way to determine engine health. So I am putting one cylinder at top dead center, putting 100 psi into the cylinder and hearing where the air leaks out, and then also looking at my gauge to see what percentage leak. All three tests combined paint the best picture of engine condition. And let me just give you one example. I've had cars before where it passes the wet and dry compression test, but fails the leak down. So if you never did the leak down, you think, oh, the engine's good. And so in these examples, right, I've had cars with bad head gaskets, cracked head, and the reason we don't see them in the compression test is because we're actively building compression. Okay, so obviously we've already done the timing belt, but with all the accessories on, with all of these cars during a inspection, I take off the front timing cover. I've had a GTR before where for another reason we took off the front timing cover, I think to verify timing. And that's when I saw the belt tension was extremely loose and the belt was full of cracks. And you know, to the owner's unfortunate surprise, they were not happy because pretty much they were like, dude, we bought this thing with a huge stack of receipts. And yeah, there's nothing quite like looking at it with your own eyes, right? Like, you know, maybe they just did the belt, they didn't do cam crank seals or water pump. Yeah, that's why I always pull off the front cover, because I don't care what any of the paperwork says. I want to see it with my own eyes and see if there's any other issues back there. Again, part of the multi-point checking the steering and suspension. Is there anything worn, loose, broken, missing? All right, so wiggling this thing side to side. I can feel it. And you can like literally hear it. We'll show the camera underneath, but basically the upper control arm bushings are so worn that I get side to side slop in the wheel. Spoiler alert, this car still has HICUS in the back. It's probably never been serviced since 1992. So, of course, you can damn near hear it. Yeah, you can see our HICUS ball joint at the knuckle. It's got slop in it. And then if we look at our inner joint, then hopefully you guys can see that inner ball joint for the HICUS tie rod has play in it too. You see that thing move? So yeah, HICUS inner tie rods, and then the ball joint for the HICUS on the knuckle. So long story short, we're going to do a GK Tech HICUS delete. Again, I've covered this in a few other videos. When you're doing a full HICUS delete, the knuckles are only one bolt away from completely coming out. You know, again, all these bushing from 1992. Along with the full HICUS delete, we're going to replace every single bushing in the rear knuckles as well. All right, so bought this thing a while ago when I knew I was going to start doing Skylines here. Or I guess I should say when more and more Skylines started to come into the shop. So, Nissan Consult 2. This is the Nissan dealership factory scan tool. I believe they have the Consult 3 or 4 now, but if you were a Nissan Tech, I guess in the 90s and early 2000s, this is what you used at the dealership. Why did I buy this? There's a lot of third-party scan tools like Nistune and like some other stuff that can read engine PIDs or engine parameter IDs, but cannot do bi-directional communication with the body control side of the vehicle. So that's a long way of me saying that those third-party tools cannot do body side stuff like bleeding the ABS pump, testing out the HICUS, steering angle. There's a whole bunch of those body side functions that I needed that those third-party tools did not offer. So I bit the bullet and bought the factory scan tool. Why don't we take a tour? So yeah, this is what it looks like. Nissan guys probably know this is the gray connector, so if you have like an S chassis or something from that era, this is your diagnostic connector. I believe there's an OBD2 connector in here somewhere. This is a very old tool. I could tell because it takes a long time to receive a command and it's got to think about things. There's a funny thing, when you plug in it'll say system call, and it said system call for a long time. First time I tried it, I thought it was broken, but no, it's just an old man. It takes a while for him to get up in the morning. Oh, post-inspection road test. Road test and my inspection after that. Mass airflow sensor, we replaced the pigtail on one of them, you could see what this guy looked like with the wires all exposed. This white wire is about to break off, and you can see these are all like hard as hell. This one was severely damaged. We replaced the top pigtail. The bottom pigtail still looks okay to use. I'm not sure how this guy got so beat up. This happened to me once. I did a few different road tests on this car, but it would not rev past 2,500 RPM. Doing a little bit of research, that's common if there's a mass airflow sensor fault, which sure enough there is. So again, handy dandy Consult 2 looking for trouble codes in the system. I literally pulled a code called mass airflow sensor code. I'm not kidding, that's what the code's called, mass airflow sensor code. So obviously, you know, those two correlate, being not able to rev past 2,500 and having a code for the mass airflow sensor. Really easy. Why don't we do a visual and see what they look like? All right, so already you can see there's some nonsense going on because there's two different MAFs in here. One has this Japanese writing, looks like it's from the Japanese Pick and Pull. The other one is an aftermarket Chinese unit that says AIP. The spectrum of these cars, the spectrum of owners, right? Today, 2023, we think of the Skyline GTR as a very expensive car, right? That wasn't the case. I personally remember when you could get a R32 GTR for under $10,000. Think about that for a second. A lot of these golden era cars, at one point, repairs for the car may have exceeded the value of the car. And I'm gonna use a little bit of context. I believe these two mass airflow sensors were about 1,500 for both of them. And so think about that for a second. If you bought your Skyline GTR for $8,000 or $9,000, it may not be worth it to you to fix the vehicle correctly. So I've seen a lot of cars like that with substandard repairs just because the value of the cars were not worth that much not so long ago. But that would explain the Pick and Pull and the Chinese mass airflow sensor in this car. We're gonna see a few of the repairs like that in this car as we continue. While we're here, why don't we just check out, you see that red thing? That's a coffee straw. All right, so why is there a coffee straw in here? So this is the vacuum port for the evap or the charcoal canister. This fitting, you can see someone tried to JB weld it at one point and probably failed. This fitting's broken. Again, probably may not have been worth it to buy another charcoal canister. So why don't we just, you know, do a substandard or a band-aid fix. Although this is an issue because our vacuum signal, this is actually a vacuum leak, which would, again, painting the picture, right? If we have a vacuum leak on the car, that could also add to the engine running rich, the computer overcompensating and adding excessive amount of fuel because we have unmetered air coming in from this vacuum leak. Oh yeah, when I pulled off the MAFs too, that Chinese MAF screen on the mass airflow sensor was like halfway breaking off. Scary stuff, because what if that screen completely breaks off and or pieces of it get sucked into the engine, right? Scary stuff. Here is where I could use a little bit of help if you're an old school Nissan dealer tech. So performing a function test or looking at the live PID data on the Consult 2, I found when the MAFs would act up and I couldn't rev above 2,500 RPM, there was a 0.15 to 0.3 volt difference between the MAF sensors at idle. Again, hopefully a old school Nissan tech knows the normal PID data off the top of his head, but I imagine both mass airflow sensors should be reading, you know, should be sucking in the same amount of air and reading the same. There's a PID on live data that says M/F space MC space MNT. It always reads rich. I've read that it needs to switch between lean and rich. Again, if you are a old school Nissan tech and understand what that PID means, please let us know. And then what is it actually supposed to read? I imagine it's not supposed to read rich or lean all the time, but is it supposed to switch? Is there a normal? Please let us know. Obviously, we've done quite a bit of work to the Skyline already. We're still working, still got a lot to do, but making good headway. Oil and filter change, obviously. We did the front and rear diff fluid service, the transmission, and the transfer case. Beware, the transfer case actually takes automatic transmission fluid in this vehicle. The radiator has an interesting story too. This is probably another previous owner thing. Why don't we take a look? the top outlet on the radiator, you notice this thing's been sawed off right here. My experience with radiators that are older with plastic end tanks, sometimes you take the hose off and the hose doesn't come off. It actually breaks the radiator. One assumption I can make is somebody tried to take the hose off and it cracked the top outlet. So whoever at some point sawed it off shorter just so he could reconnect the hose. Again, like, what were these cars worth at the time, and how much did these owners want to put into them? Because of this nonsense, we're not reusing this radiator. Brand new Koyo radiator. We're gonna install this guy. Should be a very nice upgrade for this car. Cooling system's one of those things I don't mess around with. So again, nice aluminum radiator. Got that R34 cooling fan, OEM fan clutch. Yeah, cooling system, don't mess around. All right, so which leads me to today. I actually had a fair amount of time to work on the car today, so we got a whole bunch done today. While I finger the engine, Nissan water pump. You can't see it, but Nissan thermostat. I guess everything Nissan in here. You know, timing components is another one of those things where, like, I don't like to mess around. Typically OEM is best. Timing belt tensioner, we replaced the stud and all the hardware for this guy. Timing belt idler plus a new bolt. You can't see it, but typically when these guys come off, you got to damage the timing belt guide in the back. So we got a brand new guide from Nissan back there. Obviously, if it's not clear, brand new Nissan timing belt. Both cam seals, front crankshaft seal. There's actually 2 of these Woodruff keys for both the timing cog and the crank pulley. We replaced both of these with Nissan items. In back of this rear timing cover is actually 2 hard lines for the charcoal canister. So these lines run behind right here. There's a hard line and then they go over here. So all the vacuum lines for the charcoal canister that connect to this guy were super deteriorated. So we replaced all those lines. So I believe we're up to speed on the work we've done to the engine so far. So far so good. Obviously, we've got to button this guy up and put everything back in. The other big thing that we talked about earlier, we're gonna do the Hikis delete, get rid of all the worn Hikis inner and outer joints. And again, because we're only 1 bolt away from taking the knuckles out, we're replacing all the bushings in the knuckles. So you're gonna need 3 pairs of these GK Tech bushings, and then these white line bushings are for the rear shocks. So Hikis delete kit, Hikis delete toe arms. I've installed a lot of these GK Tech Hikis deletes already. I really like them. I actually prefer them over the SPL kit, the SPL Hikis delete kit, which I've also installed on a customer car before. Run this in my personal car as well. Those worn upper control arm bushings, we are going to go ahead, put in some Cusco upper control arms. There's actually like 3 or 4 part numbers for these guys. We got the ones that were 5 millimeters shorter, which means it will gain us a little bit more of a static negative camber, which will be good for the handling of the car. So these guys should be a nice upgrade. All right, so quick update. Obviously, the engine bay is all together. Good news, car starts and runs. It sounds a lot healthier than before now that it's, you know, timed correctly and, you know, a lot of stuff's new in it. Here's a big problem we just found. Okay, so as I was running the car, I noticed the freaking CAS was going like in and out. And in my mind, I was like, what the hell is going on? And I know in the service manual, this solid timing cover, it says like try to loosen it up and try to center it up. And so I tried a bunch of things, loosened it up, centered it up, and I was like, what else could it be? So if I could take a guess what happened, so quick thing, you see this gasket right here for the crank angle sensor with these solid washers. So this engine was not running this gasket before. We got this, you know, as part of the timing belt service. If I could take a guess, because this ran for so long without this CAS gasket, it might have damaged or bent the crank angle sensor. Like you saw, it's obviously bent. And I'm just quickly looking online. It looks like, yeah, that's common. If you don't run the gasket on the timing cover, there's high probability it'll damage the CAS. I took the CAS back out. Let's see what it looks like. So the shaft of the CAS, I was spinning that thing around visually trying to see, and I was like, well, it looks like it, but you know, this dial indicator will tell us for sure. So if you guys look at this, You can see there's a huge amount of run out in that cast where it's supposed to basically be zero run out. So obviously the shaft is bent. Bittersweet timing belt job. It's honestly not a huge deal. We're either gonna have to bite the bullet and get a brand new cast, or hopefully source a good used unit locally. But you know, it's great that again, bittersweet, right? It's great the timing belt job went well, but it sucks. This is like an expensive thing that shouldn't have happened. More updates to come. It's really nice to have another Skyline in the shop. I'm still not numb to these cars. This is still like really exciting for me. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be able to help get this car back up and running and reliable and ready to enjoy again. Questions, comments, anything else you want to see about this car? And then OG Nissan techs, please let me know about that Consult 2 PID list stuff. Appreciate all the support, you guys, and I'll catch you guys next time.